Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion organised by Aid to the Church in Need, ACN and Farm Street Church, titled Dare to Believe, Is Religious Freedom Under Growing Threat Around the World? Thank you for finding the time to be here in person on this beautiful spring afternoon. I welcome all of you who are joining us via the live stream and listening on Radio Maria England. My name is Karen Singarayer, and I am an Aid to the Church in Need ambassador. This event comes at a time when ACN is urging all of us to support the charity's first ever global advocacy campaign. The initiative, a petition, calls on governments throughout the world and the United Nations to do more to stamp out persecution and uphold religious freedom. ACN invites each of us to sign this special petition calling for the full enforcement of Article 18 of the United Nations, of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states, quote, "Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others and in public or private to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance." Archbishop Ettore Balestrero, the Holy See's permanent observer to the United Nations, said last month that nations bear the responsibility to protect, respect, and guarantee freedom of religion. He said, quote, "Almost 400 million Christians worldwide face persecution or violence, making them the most persecuted religious community in the world. This means that 1 in 7 Christians is affected," end of quote. He also said, quote, "Even worse, almost 5,000 Christians were killed for their faith in 2025, which equates to an average of 13 per day," end of quote. The permanent observer of the Holy See to the United Nations issued a statement last month highlighting how the growing instances of intolerance, discrimination, and hostility targeting Muslims, Jews, Christians, and followers of traditional religions are as a result of failure to acknowledge and defend the right to freedom of religion or belief. Pope Leo XIV's address to the delegation of ACN in October 2025 stated that when freedom is denied, the human person, quote, "is deprived of the capacity to respond freely to the call of truth," end of quote. A huge thanks to all the panel members and participants for being part of this discussion. This is a measure of the commitment of each panelist to this topic and shows how compelled they feel that you should have an opportunity to hear their perspectives rooted in their expertise and experience. It is an honor and gives me great pleasure to introduce someone who really needs no introduction from me. The Right Honourable Baroness Patricia Scotland KC is a British lawyer, parliamentarian and international leader who served as Secretary General of the Commonwealth from 2016 to 2025. She was the first black woman appointed Queen's Counsel and the first woman to serve as Attorney General for England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Appointed to the House of Lords in 1997, she has held senior ministerial roles across government and is former Chancellor of the University of Greenwich and former Vice President of Chatham House. Baroness Scotland holds innumerable awards, including the Dame Grand Cross with Star of the Constantine Order of St. George. Baroness Scotland is a devout Roman Catholic. Professor Brian Grimm, founding president of the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation, is a globally recognized expert on religious freedom. His work spans continents and institutions, including advising the World Economic Forum. Professor Grimm's pioneering work at the Pew Research Center led to the development of global indices, which are now key tools for monitoring religious freedom worldwide. He emphasized building inclusive environments for people of all faiths and those without religious affiliation. We will hear an address as audio messages from David Smith, MP, and the Right Reverend, the Lord Bishop of Winchester. David Smith, MP, is the UK Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief since December 2024, a role which involves working internationally to promote and protect religious freedom. He is the MP for North Northumberland, and before his election in 2024, he previously worked for the Bible Society and Tear Fund. Bishop Philip Mounstephen is the Anglican Bishop of Winchester. His groundbreaking report, the first of its kind, and drawing on worldwide research, including material submitted by ACN, was published in 2019, titled Independent Review of Foreign and Commonwealth Office Support for Persecuted Christians. The recommendations with the UK government quickly adopted broadly aimed to support freedom of religion or belief for all. We are grateful to two brave individuals from two different faith backgrounds who share their survivor witness testimonies about religious freedom violations in Pakistan. These two young people were nearly killed for their beliefs. Farhan Saleem brings a unique and harrowing perspective to the Article 18 debate. A Pakistani lawyer with an LLM from Queen Mary University of London, Farhan's life was upended when a targeted attack claimed Farhan's father's life, an incident Farhan narrowly survived. Now a qualified mortgage advisor in the UK, Farhan represents the intersection of professional excellence and the lived reality of religious persecution. Today, Farhan will bridge the gap between legal theory and human experience, sharing a journey of loss, survival, and the enduring fight for freedom of belief. Our second testimony is anonymous and via an audio message. Religious freedom is by no means an abstract notion. When it is denied, it has catastrophic consequences for individuals, their loved ones, and indeed whole communities. The impact of oppression or the threat of it can lead the victims of religious hatred into social isolation, with the threat of capture and even death hanging over them. Forced into hiding, cut off from their communities, they become dangerous to know. For most of us in the West, we can only begin to imagine what this might be like. Our speaker cannot reveal his name or indeed his face for fear of the potential harm it might do to his family back home. This individual, a Christian, suffered life-threatening persecution in Pakistan and eventually gained asylum in the UK. Many of you will know John Pontifex, the head of press and public affairs at ACN UK. His efforts have been recognized with the landmark publication of Persecuted and Forgotten, which began in 2007, which highlights the ongoing challenges faced by Christians worldwide, particularly in the context of increasing violence and persecution. Reverend Father Dr. Dominic Robinson SJ is the parish priest of Farm Street Church and ecclesiastical assistant to ACN UK. Father Dominic is acting senior Catholic chaplain at the University of Oxford and is also chair of Justice and Peace in the Diocese of Westminster, amongst other roles. This event is being filmed, recorded, live-streamed, broadcast on radio, and photographed. There are different representatives of the media present this afternoon. Some brief housekeeping. If there is a fire or other emergency and we have to leave urgently, exits are at the back of the church onto Farm Street or via doors to the left and right of me at the front of the church to Mount Street. Over 5 billion people live in countries where there is persecution, oppression, and discrimination. The situation for many religious minorities simply wanting to live out their faith in conscience and with respect to the right of others is sadly getting worse. And that's why ACN has launched this Religious Freedom Campaign, a petition calling on governments and international bodies to uphold and protect Article 18, enshrining this fundamental right of belief. I encourage you all to add your name to the Article 18 petition. There are clipboards that will be circulated where you can add your name to the petition, and some of our volunteers will now just hold up the laminated sheets. There, you may have seen them around the church. You can also scan the QR code which you will see on the laminated cards, which will be upheld by our team here today, who will be walking up and down the pews. Simply scan the QR code and it will take you straight through to the petition page on the ACN website. Those of you online will be able to click on the web link available on your screens now. The latest Religion Freedom Report, published by ACN, can be viewed online, and also some copies are available in the pews. There will be an opportunity to show your support practically for the urgent work of ACN in Lebanon at this crucial time. The charity has launched an emergency campaign, provided food, shelter, and pastoral supports. More details are available in the sheets provided. This is a time of immense suffering, with more than 1 million displaced in Lebanon within just weeks. You can donate either in cash or by contactless payment as you leave the church. The format this afternoon will be that we will hear from each speaker, followed by questions from Father Dominic. During the speeches, there will be time for you to write any questions you may have on the cards at the end of your pews with the pens provided, like this card here. Please hand them to the volunteers by raising your hand, and someone will collect them and bring them to me. Father Dominic will then collate the questions and ask them from the panel, so we have a range of questions. We aim to conclude the event by 4:45 p.m., if not well before, and you are all invited to join us for refreshments in the Arupe Hall in the adjoining London Jesuit Centre. Without any further delay, I will hand you over to Father Dominic Robinson for what promises to be an in-depth discussion at this important time in society about examples and consequences of undermining safeguards to religious freedom. Do we dare to believe? Is religious freedom under growing threat around the world?
Good afternoon, everyone, and on behalf of Farm Street, as well as on behalf of Aid to the Church in Need, a very warm welcome to you, whether you're here in the church or whether you are following through the online channel, or indeed if you are listening on Radio Maria. Before we launch into our presentations, we're going to turn to God in prayer. Aid to the Church in Need invites us to do three things in response to the issues around religious freedom in the world: prayer, information, and action. And so we start with prayer. Whether we are Christian, whether we are of another religion or none, then I invite you to join with me in wishing that this time, this hour and a half this afternoon, informs us and inspires us to action. I'm going, though, to pray a prayer which has been composed only recently by our Holy Father, Pope Leo. And in praying this, I'm also wanting to invite us to include in our thoughts and prayers those particularly whom we might want to pray for, and especially, and I know that there are people here in the church and I'm sure also wherever you are, who have friends and family who are caught up in the war at the moment in the Middle East and through violations of religious freedom. Let us pray. Lord Jesus, you conquered death without weapons or violence. You shattered its power with the strength of peace. Grant us your peace, as you did to the women filled with doubt on Easter morning, as you did to the disciples who were hiding in fear. Send forth your Spirit, the breath that gives life and reconciles, that turns adversaries and enemies into brothers and sisters. Inspire in us to trust in Mary, your mother, who stood at the foot of your cross with a broken heart, firm in the faith that you would rise again. May the madness of war cease, and the earth be cared for and cultivated by those who still know how to bring forth, protect, and love life. Hear us, Lord of life. Amen. And so it's a great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Baroness Patricia Scotland.
It is indeed a great privilege and a pleasure to be with you in this holy place in person. And I think each and every one of us should celebrate that we have that opportunity. We are at one of the most difficult moments in our history. There are more conflicts in our world today than at any other period since the end of the Second World War, when Article 18 was crafted to give expression to the hopes for humanity. And it is difficult for us to grasp that what we are doing here this afternoon on this beautiful spring day in London is something which others are often denied. We're able to talk, we're able to challenge, we're able to discuss, and we come together as a community of peoples, those of faith and those of none, free to speak and express ourselves in any way we choose. We do this in this sacred space and in relative safety. And this privilege is precious because it is not one which we should take lightly. The Religious Freedom in the World report, which has been circulated and is before us, makes it absolutely clear that more than 5.4 billion people in our world, that's 2/3 of our world, live in countries without religious freedom. Yet it is a fundamental tenet of our human rights. And it's a right which each of us must fight for. Because if one of us does not have the right to believe or not to believe, then none of us are safe. And each of us, in our own way, from wherever we are, in whatever we do, has the responsibility to make sure that the right enshrined in Article 18 is not just an aspiration, but it is a reality. And many of us will say, but that is not something that I can do. I am too weak. I'm too unimportant. I can do little. And what I want to say to you is that is not true. And I say it from a position of experience. Because I remember too well when I was a teenager growing up in London that I was told, as the 10th of my mother and father's 12 only children, that I could not achieve. Told by those outside that I was black, I was female, I was socialist, and I was Catholic. The only thing that they said would have made me better is if I'd been gay, because then I would have had all the discriminatory elements in one person. But I believed, and my parents believed, that that was not true, that every person was given something by God, a special gift, and it was our job to find that gift, to hone it, and to use it for other people. But I'm incredibly grateful to my parents because they taught me something else. They taught me that every person, irrespective of faith, was worthy of respect. My father was not a Catholic. He was a devout Methodist. My mother said the Angelus 4 times a day. And their marriage, which lasted almost 70 years, demonstrated what you can do if you respect and love the other. But more than that, my little family of 12, well 14 if you count my mother and father, lived next door to an Orthodox synagogue. And my brother and my 2 sisters, we were the only non-Jewish members of the Jewish Youth Club. And we ended up as chairman, secretary, and treasurer. So I learnt comity. I learnt value. We lived opposite to the cantor, and just next door was a very dear friend, the Patels, who were Muslim. So what did we learn? We learned value in all faiths, and we learned value of none. And so I grew up being taught that you look for what joins you as opposed to what separates you. In our world today, we are being taught to disrespect the other, to be frightened of the other, to make sure that the other does not thrive. And we know that as Christians, that is a fundamental desecration of what we believe, because we believe every individual is made in the image of God. And I'll never forget what my mother once told me. She said this. She said, every single person you see, you have to speak to them as if you're speaking to Christ. And you must put Christ's face on every face you see, particularly those you despise and you really, really do not like. Because if you would not say it to Christ, do not say it to them. And so I think it's really important that as we fight for those who want to express their religious freedom, we have to remember, particularly as Christians, as the most threatened it would appear of all faiths that we have to fight for the other, because the other belongs to Christ too. So what actually did I do? How did this affect my life? And I say to each of you that each of us can do something. Because having been told I could do nothing, at 20, when I finished my degree, I was told, you can do nothing. But I believed that I could do nothing, but God could do much. And so at 21, when I became a barrister, I was told, lawyers don't do faith. God is not in the courtroom. And you should remember it. And I did remember it, but I remembered it differently. God was in that courtroom. God was in every case I did. And I prayed for every case that I did. And I remember coming back one day and being told this, because I had a tendency to win. And I came back to Chambers and they said, have you won? And I said, yes. And then one of my friends said, oh, we know. Patricia hasn't won. God has. To which I said, correct. And when I became a minister, I was a minister in the Labour government from 1999 to 2010. I was told by some, we don't do God. To which I said, we do now. When I became the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, the first woman to do that, I was told in slow tones, because, you know, I'm not very bright, Secretary General, we don't do God. It is the Commonwealth, and we have many faiths. To which I said, but we do now. And what did I learn? In every single space was that there was space for God if you made it. And that if we did not make space for God, then we didn't make space for humanity. And that what joined us, all people of faith and those of none, was far greater than what separated us. I tend to say it's like our DNA. 99.9% of our DNA is exactly the same, every human being. What divides us is 0.1%. And yet we don't concentrate on the 99% which makes us human. We concentrate on the 0.1% which makes us different. And what I found in working in the Commonwealth is, and indeed as a minister, if we concentrated on the 99%, we could do anything. Because most of our faiths are the same, whether you're a humanist, a Hindu, a Jew, a Catholic, a Muslim, the tenets of what we believe are very much the same. So the fight that's on to make Article 18 real for everyone is a fight that we must all be part of. And if I look back at the things that we have achieved for the religious and the non, it has been remarkable because we've been able to engage everyone. I think about our faith in the Commonwealth. We brought people of all races, all religions together, not to talk about the difference which separated us, but the things in the world that we had to do. Delivering the Sustainable Development Goals, delivering our Paris agenda, delivering laws that would enforce Article 18, helping people to understand it wasn't rhetoric that we had to implement. We had to find the practical ways of making sure that people would touch it, taste it, feel it, sense it. And we succeeded because we worked together. And so I think this is a real moment of challenge for each of us. A challenge as to whether we truly believe in the tenets of our respective faiths, and whether we are willing to come together with one voice and to be able to say, not in our name. Because I think, my dear friends, one of the realities that we have is that it is down to each of us. If we're silent, nothing will change. If we're silent, the injustices of our world will continue. But there is a power in the collective that many have forgotten. I can't tell you how many times I have been told that which you aspire is impossible. It cannot be done. It cannot change. And I remember so clearly what Nelson Mandela said. He said, everything is impossible until it's done. And so I think as we face this challenge, we have to understand that that which we aspire to do is possible if we have the courage to hold each other's hand and deliver it. We need the implementation strategies. We need to have our voice heard. And I know that it is possible. And I also know this: I cannot do this, but I know a man who can. And every time I've asked him, Lord, in your mercy, hear my prayer, he has heard. In the Commonwealth, in the 9 years when I was Secretary General, we had many difficulties. Out of the 56 countries representing 2.7 billion people in the world, 1/3 of the world, 27 of those countries were in difficulties, whether it was war on the horizon, climate change, division amongst people of faith. And on each occasion, it was said to be impossible. And we prayed. And I'll give you just one example. It was in Sierra Leone, and we were on the brink of civil war, it was said. And I flew on my 38th wedding anniversary, having promised my husband that I would for once be with him. And I was asked to go to Sierra Leone because they said it was absolutely essential that I was there in order to help broker peace. And everyone said, it is impossible. And on the night before the peace negotiations, the tree was split in half, and people said, this is the end of Sierra Leone. This is a sign from God that civil war is going to come back. And my team went to Mass, and they came back with the parts, the branches of the tree. And we turned that which was supposed to be a sign of doom into a sign of life, because we said God may have divided and broken the old Sierra Leone, but from that would come the new. And there was peace. And people said it couldn't be done, but God did it. So what I tell you from experience. This can be done, but it has to be done by us, each of us. And there are things you will do and can do every day with the people you meet to make sure that Article 18 is a reality. So please join the fight. Make sure that the peace which we thirst for will be the peace that our world will be given because of the efforts of each and every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Baroness Patricia Scotland for such a personal and powerful presentation and testimony. We're now going to have an audio message from David Smith, MP.
Hello, I'm David Smith and I am the UK Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief. I bring you greetings to your Dare to Believe conference. I want to thank Aid to the Church in Need for all the great work that they do to raise the issue of persecution of people of all beliefs and faiths, but particularly Catholics around the world. I was very struck by the report that ACN produced, which mentioned that 5.4 billion people around the world live in countries where they face serious violations of their right to believe. So the work that ACN do is fantastic. The government takes this situation very, very seriously, and I was pleased last year to launch the first ever foreign policy strategy on FORB for the UK government, right at the heart of the FCDO in Whitehall. And that is playing out in some very specific ways. I'll give you a few examples. Eleanor Sanders is our UN Human Rights Ambassador in Geneva, and just last month, she was able to give the UK's statement on desecration of religious burial sites in particular, and specifically mentioned the plight of Ahmadi Muslims in Pakistan, which I know is one of the things that you're looking at today. Myself, to give you a couple of examples of what I've been working on, last July I was at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and I was pleased to be able to focus on the issue of Tibet and the succession of the Dalai Lama, and specifically be able to tell the Chinese government not to interfere in that process. Last month I was at the Vatican, where I was very honoured to be able to meet His Holiness Pope Leo and to reaffirm the UK's commitment again to FORB with him and some of the other cardinals and archbishops that I met with. And then recently in the Chamber of the House of Commons, where I serve as a Member of Parliament, I've also been able to raise the situation faced by Christians in the Middle Belt in northern Nigeria and the persecution that we know that they have been facing with the conflict there, as well as raising the issue of house churches in China and the persecution, for example, of Zion Church and the leaders there. So this is an issue that the UK government takes very seriously. It's something that is at the heart of our foreign policy and will continue to be, as set out in Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which we are absolutely signed up to and committed to. So it's good to be partnering with you. I wish you every success for this conference and all the best.
Thank you very much to David Smith for that really important message to us. It's now a great pleasure to introduce Professor Brian Grimm.
So I want to read the Article 18 again, but as you hear it this time, think of it applying to each person where they work, in their work life. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. So I'll try to unpack that idea that this applies to where we work, whether it's at a store, a bank, a church office, or wherever we're working, that this is a freedom that we need to practice in our life. It was mentioned some of the research that I've done, and measuring religious freedom in each country of the world was what I did my doctoral dissertation on. And once you measure something, you can see how it relates to other things. So that measurement, then we were able to analyze and see that where you have more religious freedom, protected by governments and respected by people in the country, two sides. So religious freedom is not just something a government gives or protects or takes away, but it's something people respect, give to each other, and can take away from each other. So measuring those two, we found that where you have less government restriction and more social tolerance or social acceptance of each other, you had peace. And it was really the first research that had been done showing that religious freedom is a formula for peace. And then, what does peace produce? Well, we're in a state of, as the Baroness mentioned, we're not just in a state of war, we're in states of war around the globe. And where that war happens, you have no hope, very little hope for economy. Often young men are dying, the next generation is hurt, infrastructure is being destroyed. The President of the United States is now threatening to destroy energy across Iran, which of course then knocks out hospital power, knocks out power for people to keep their health and their livelihood. So war, a lack of religious freedom, is underneath all of this. I won't comment too much on the United States, other than to say that the current political rhetoric is not one of religious freedom, but it's one of religious certitude or co-opting religion. Even Pope Francis mentioned that is using politics to co-opt religion to do what you would want to do. So anyhow, that lack of religious freedom then is a cause of war and a lack of prosperity or sustainable development. So as I've measured these things through the years and spoken on them around the world and worked with many governments and others, often when such an important issue, you would think that this whole church would be filled with 1,000 people, or how many can we hold in here? But there's not enough of us working on this very important topic. And that's when I then looked at the data, or looked at what I was analyzing, and said, well, there's a case that business should care about religious freedom. And when we think of the big power centers of the world that can change and move things in significant ways, we often think, when we think of religious freedom, trying to impact a government, which is important. But seldom do we think of what this means for business, because it has an economic consequence. When you have no religious freedom, you often have war and conflict, and that's bad for all business except bullet and bomb makers, which unfortunately is a kind of business. So how do we get more involved? And that's the mission that I've been on, is business. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment, but I want to go back to the workplace. So I imagine many of you, most of you, have some workplace that you either are going to, or if you're retired, have gone to. And you can imagine that situation. Well, I worked in the United Arab Emirates for a number of years. And if you know the history of that country, Sheikh Zayed was born in a city called Al Ain, which, if you take Abu Dhabi and Dubai and you draw a triangle into the sand on the border of Oman, is a town called Al Ain, and there was a hospital there called Oasis Hospital, a missionary hospital. You know the Chariots of Fire story of Eric Liddell. One of his nephews was a doctor there that was a pediatrician, or he helped some of our kids when we were working there. So Sheikh Zayed was born in that hospital, and he created a country. He's passed away now, but the founder of the UAE, created a country that was open to other faiths. And he gave in Al Ain land for the Catholic Church and other churches to be built. And in fact, my kids were all confirmed in the UAE in a church on land that Sheikh Zayed, Muslim ruler, gave to the church. And my wife and I, she's in the front row, we just came from Baltimore Cathedral, where 3 of our grandkids were just confirmed yesterday. We came from Baltimore to New York to here, so if my voice gives out a little bit, maybe you'll understand. But there, that confirmation in that country. But we worked previously in Saudi Arabia, and there the country is defined by protecting those 2 holy mosques against Iran. Iran even attacked and took over the mosque in Mecca at one point some years ago. So there's a very religiously defined, nationalistic, one view. There, when I came, we had to turn all our passports in. This was 1997, some years ago. But they put an orange sticker on all of our blue American passports, essentially identifying that we were non-Muslims, and so that we couldn't slip into Mecca. And then they locked those passports away, and I couldn't get them without putting 2 months' salary as a ransom to get my passports out of the safe. So it was a place that there's no churches even today, and in those days we couldn't. The only mass that was held was at the embassy. We had to go through barbed wire, and eventually it was impossible. So just to say, the workplace there, I counted the days until I could I'm sorry, I didn't. I counted the hours. Each day I would mark off another hour done till I was done my contract. And I just kept my head down. I was told if I'd even mentioned Christmas to the students, I was a teacher, I'd be fired, could be put in jail. Very repressive situation. But in the UAE, it was very different. And I'll share the experience that was the pivot of my life that happened in the UAE. This was on September 11th, 2001. I had just dropped off my oldest daughter in Dubai. She was going to do a year with the Royal Academy of Dance to get certified as a ballet instructor. They had a program in Dubai. And I drove back to Al Ain, several hours across the desert. And when I got there, she called and said, "Dad, look on the TV, we didn't have a TV, had a computer, and I saw the first World Trade Center collapsing." At that time, I was the academic coordinator for the UAE Military Academy. And in the academy, we had a mosque, and the general called us in, and he said, "We want to keep all of you safe here at this moment," when everyone was feeling didn't know if a plane would fly into any building in the world at that moment. Here I had a Muslim general keeping us safe, and as we sat around, it was a green table like this down here in the front. We sat around the table, and and he was making plans to keep us all safe. And just then the prayer call went off, and the general looked over to the sergeant who had been serving us tea and asked the sergeant, "You're better at this, you come lead us in prayer." And then he looked over at me and he said, "Well, I know you're Christian. Stay here, and you're welcome. We want you to stay here and pray with us." And that very moment when, the world was collapsing, here I had someone who was a good Samaritan. I was the one who was feeling left by the side of the road. And he was the one that reached out to me and kept me safe and included me in prayer in my workplace. So that moment defined how I looked at work, because I know in the UAE, I wrote some books of poetry that were used to teach the first-year students across the country English. And I didn't count the hours till I could get out of my job. I was really invested and motivated in my job. And the difference was just religious freedom, whether they respected me and allowed me to have my faith and work. So that's the same story that so many people have in their own workplace. The latest research finds that the majority of people in the UK are afraid to even mention that they went to church one Sunday, or they went to pray at a mosque on Friday, or they keep Shabbat. So imagine the productivity that's lost by people feeling like I have to hide the best self, my best self. Well, that's what I've been working on, and that's resonated with a lot of companies. Tomorrow, we're having an event at EY on Canary Wharf at their top conference floor, and it's an event for businesses to celebrate religious inclusion, faith at work, religious freedom at work, and it's sold out. And we're honoring companies from different sectors, from government sector, AWE, that does the nuclear energy and nuclear research, Baringa, a top management consulting company, EY itself, top among the big four in religious inclusion, John Lewis Partnership, Waitrose, everybody knows them. And I'll mention some others, but the folks from John Lewis Partnership and Waitrose, we're having an event then on Tuesday night at Parliament to celebrate this, which you're welcome to come to if you're interested. I'll give you details. And they were writing in and said, well, we want to send a lot of people. How many spots do you have? I said, well, it's a room. It has 40 people. And they said, it's not enough. But they're just so excited to be able to celebrate that their company lets them bring their whole soul to work. Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever their soul is. So my wife and I are going to do a little shopping later today, and there's a Waitrose and a Tesco. Guess which one we're going to go to? So there's a business benefit when when you realize a company is faith-friendly. Well, maybe I'll shop there. Well, I'm going to end just with one example of we have at least, I don't know, maybe there's some other lawyers here, other jurists, but I work with Notre Dame University in America with their law school, and I was on their religious liberty board. And every year we have a big conference on religious liberty, and more or less the same people come every year, and they spend a lot of money on it. And I asked them, how many of your graduates will go into religious liberty law, and it's maybe a handful. What do the rest of them do? Oh, they go into corporate law. And it's legal. In fact, it's illegal to discriminate and not accommodate religion in the workplace. And there's some really great practices of employee faith groups in the workplace and other policies that companies can do. And wouldn't it be great if every one of those lawyers who's being trained to go into the corporate world would also be trained in how to advance religious freedom in the workplace? So that's just the challenge I'll leave. The Baroness also give a challenge, what can we do? And I think, thinking through this lens of how can we get workplaces to become faith-friendly right here, wherever you're working, but these companies that are large companies, they're working around the world, and they can carry those same policies around the world. So as you think through, again, religious freedom, try to expand the lens through which we think, how can we move the needle to get more people concerned about this right where they work and live? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Grimm, for giving us a personal testimony which also gave us something of your expertise on this important area of economic prosperity. Thank you so much. We have about another 25 minutes of presentations, and it's a great pleasure now to introduce Farhan Saleem, who's going to give us a testimony on behalf of the Ahmadiyya Muslims in Pakistan.
Thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to explain my feelings and share my testimony with you. Thank you so much to ACN. And very first thing, I have not been to many churches. I'm a Muslim by faith, so I'm truly impressed by the architecture of this church. So again, thank you so much. In terms of my testimony, let me give you a small intro about myself. My name is Muhammad Farhan Saleem. I am originally from Pakistan. There's a city called Nankana Sahib, a small town. I was born there. Then I was brought up main city, Lahore. So I did my studies over there. By faith, I am an Ahmadi Muslim. And probably all the discussion that we have had so far from the Baroness and the Professor, probably none of you could relate to that much as I can, because I have been through that story. I have lived that journey myself my whole life until I came to the UK. So the discrimination and hatred based on the religion, that is what I have experienced my whole life. I could remember I've been to school, I've been to college, I've been to workplaces, and everywhere I used to hide myself, my true identity, what my religious beliefs were. Only because the moment I was, disclosed, my identity was disclosed, people started hatred and they started discriminating me. I've been asked by my teachers when I was in my primary school, when I was in my high school, that you are not supposed to sit with other children, and it's not something that I'm exaggerating. So again, due to the time constraints, I will just go to that sad incident where I lost my father. So I was a lawyer by profession, and my father was a practicing lawyer as well. And he was practicing for more than 4 decades, and it's an event which happened in 2017. So me and my father, we were going to our office. I was a junior of my father, something I'm really proud of. And so we used to go to our chambers just like another normal day, and we were on our motorbike, and there was a guy who was in the security uniform, and he was waiting for us. The moment we came to that turning point, he stopped me while I was riding the bike, and he had a short pump action shotgun, you can say. So he pointed that gun towards my belly, and he asked me to, he didn't say anything to me, and I was just trying to figure out what is actually happening over there. Why is he pointing a gun at me while I'm just going to my workplace like a normal day? By the time this thought, went through my mind, so he shot that fire. I had my hand on my accelerator. The moment I realized, okay, he's going to shot that fire, I did the acceleration, and that bullet, instead of hitting me on my belly, hit my father on his chest. And again, he loaded that shotgun and he triggered the second fire, and that hit my father on his back, and he fell off the bike. The bike went ahead, the bike slipped. I jumped out of the bike. I started running towards the other direction out of my own instinct, like the first reaction that you get, okay, somebody is trying to kill you, so what would you do? You would definitely run in the other direction, in the other side. So the moment I realized, okay, now I have come so far that he's not nearby, so I need to look at my father. So I started running back towards my father. So I could see my father's dead body was lying over there, and he was standing, the murderer, the killer, he was standing in the middle of the road. and he was looking at me. So I thought, okay, probably this is the end, and I better go to my father and I see him. I check if he's still alive, or I mean, what's the situation. So I started walking towards him, and the killer, he started following me. He had the same gun at that time, so he drawn that gun upon my head, and he pulled the trigger. I could still remember the voice of that trigger, and the bullet didn't come out of that gun at that time. Once I realized, okay, the trigger, I checked my back, where did it hit? But I kept on walking towards my father. So he again unloaded the gun. He loaded the gun again. During this time, I could see my father's dead body over there. I'm walking towards him, and he again loaded the gun. He tried to kill me again, but the bullet didn't come out of that gun. And eventually he ran away. So I picked up the dead body of my father from there. Emergency services were called. A huge mob was gathered around us. Nobody tried to help us. So I picked up the body from legs, and the emergency guys, they picked up the body from the chest, and I put him on the stretcher, and then I picked him up, I put him in the ambulance, and that's how I went on. So this is not something that a Hollywood movie or a fiction that I'm telling to you. I mean, this is a real life example. This is what I have been through myself. And I have not told you the whole background, but Ahmadi Muslims have been persecuted in Pakistan in all capacities. Whether you are going to school, whether you are a child, whether you are a woman over there, whether you are a working woman, whether you are working, in any capacity, if you name it. Once your identity is disclosed as an Ahmadi Muslim in Pakistan, there is no way you can survive over there. So, I lost my father, I lost my home, I lost my work, I lost everything. I had a very great connection with my father, and he was my colleague, he was my friend, he was my mentor, he was my everything. So I moved from Pakistan to UK, then I did my LLM, then I eventually got my qualification as a mortgage advisor. I have a very beautiful family now. I just became a dad like 2 months ago. So once you are living in this culture, in this society, I know that none of you probably would agree to my religious beliefs, but I do not have any fear or any that feeling that I cannot disclose myself. I can openly disclose myself, okay, these are my religious beliefs, but that does not mean that you should kill me. That's the only point that I'm trying to make. So for me, it is a very difficult time to go through that incident again and again, to go through that painful moment that, okay, I have to pick up the dead body of my father. So why I'm here and why I'm sharing my story, so just we can raise the awareness, as the Baroness had mentioned, as the professor has mentioned in his speech, that probably we need to raise awareness that religious freedom is the only solution towards peace. And I think we should all raise our voice, we should raise our concerns, and we should work together towards this peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Farhan Saleem for telling us this tragic story, this testimony, but also speaking words of hope and of sense to us. Please do take a card, which I think the ACN volunteers and staff are going to be up and down the church for your questions, to write down your questions. It might be to a particular member of the panel, or it might be to the panel in general. So please do please keep them coming. Now we have the privilege of having an anonymous, a necessarily anonymous testimony from a Christian in Pakistan.
I'm a Christian from Pakistan, And what I'm about to share is not just my story, it is the reality of many believers in my country. I have suffered persecution for my faith, and there was even a time when people tried to kill me. But by God's grace, I'm still alive today. Before I continue, I want to explain why I am not showing my identity. Even though I'm speaking from a place of safety, I cannot reveal who I am, because my family and friends are still in Pakistan. On paper, the laws of Pakistan say that minorities are protected, but the reality on the ground is very different. Let me give you one example. A Christian woman, Asia Bibi, was falsely accused of blasphemy in 2009. She was sentenced to death in 2010 and spent nearly 9 years in prison before being acquitted in 2018. A Muslim politician, Salman Taseer, bravely spoke out in her defense and called for justice. He stood for what was right. But in 2011, he was assassinated by his own bodyguard for supporting her. His courage helped bring global attention to her case, and years later, after her release, she was finally able to leave Pakistan for safety. If even a government minister could not be protected by the law, then you can understand how dangerous it is for ordinary people like us. The reality of extremism is very real, and too often no one raises their voice, and even the authorities remain silent. I want to share a few moments from my life, stories of what it was like growing up as a Christian child in Pakistan. My experience of persecution began when I was just a child. In school, my teachers and classmates called us Christians chura, a deeply offensive word meaning filthy, and we were treated as if we did not belong. One day, while I was in an Islamic education class, which I was required to attend despite being a Christian, the lesson included an activity where students were told to go to a non-Muslim friend and invite them to Islam. Suddenly, the entire class came towards me one by one, urging me to accept Islam. I was just a child, surrounded and overwhelmed, and I began to cry until the teacher finally sent me home. For a week, I refused to return to school. But then my father encouraged me with a verse from the Bible about rejoicing in persecution and the promise of eternal life. His words gave me strength, and I returned to school, although I continued to struggle with how one could rejoice in such suffering. As I grew older, the persecution continued in different ways. When I worked as a waiter, I was told I could not touch the food because, as a Christian, I would contaminate it. On other occasions, when I was part of a Christian band performing at an event, money went missing, and simply because we were Christians, we were immediately accused without evidence, dragged into a room, and beaten in an attempt to force a confession. Later, I had the opportunity to travel to the United Kingdom on a short-term visa to serve at a Christian center. After I returned to Pakistan, a friend asked me to help him come to the UK, but I explained that the visa was only for Christians serving as volunteers. By God's grace, I was given another opportunity to come again to the United Kingdom on the same short-term visa to serve in a Christian center. While I was there, he kept calling me again and again, asking me to help him pretend to be a Christian just so he could come to the UK. But I refused and would not take part in something dishonest. That refusal changed everything. Friendship turned into anger, and anger into hatred. I began receiving threatening phone calls, and one day he gathered a mob, went to my family home, falsely accusing me of offering Christian visas in exchange for conversion, which was completely untrue, and demanding that I return. That same night, my family had to flee their home for safety, and my father called me and told me not to come back. Today, I'm safe here in the United Kingdom, But my family, my friends, and countless other Christians and people of minority faiths in Pakistan are not safe and live in fear every day. Not a day goes by when I do not think of them and pray for them. We are not asking for pity. We are asking not to be forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such a courageous testimony. Please do bring the ACN staff volunteers, if there are Q&A from the questions on the cards, please do bring them up to the table here so that we can begin to go through them. It's now a great pleasure to introduce John Pontifex, Head of Press and Information at Aid to the Church in Need, who's going to speak to us also about the petition.
Thank you very much, Father Dominic. In February, just about 10 days before the outbreak of war in Iran and across the Middle East, my colleague Elliot Banks and I had the enormous privilege of traveling to Iraq. Well, it's a country I've been to on a number of occasions. In fact, Father Dominic has been there too, and I've been there over the course of 20 years or more. And in the intervening period from 2008 to 2026, what was, of course, Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, has once again, it happened many times in its history, but once again in the period in question, it's been beset by violence, by oppression, much of it motivated by religious hatred. As many of you will be only too aware, in 2014, Daesh, ISIS, Islamic State, they went under a range of different names, extremists of that nature seized Iraq's second city of Mosul and large tranches of the Nineveh Plains, whose significance is only too obvious for those with just a fleeting knowledge of sacred scripture. Christians were among many who fled their homes, their churches were desecrated with offensive graffiti. I remember seeing it myself in the great Al-Tahira church in Karakosh, Baghdad. Crucifixes, statues smashed and desecrated. People were told to convert, or there is, quote, nothing for you but the sword. What Yazidis suffered was so much worse. The UN itself has reported that in the space of 3 years, Islamic State killed as many as 5,000 Yazidis, and they trafficked about 10,800 Yazidi women and girls in what was described as a forced conversion campaign. Within a year of seizing control, nearly 3/4 of the global Yazidi population was displaced by this genocide. And it's sorry to have to say to you that such acts of violence are not confined to that period starting in 2014. They're continuing to this day. Let's just look at the Easter period only a couple of weeks back. Over the Easter weekend, Aid to the Church in Need received reports of more than 30 Christians in Gujranwala in Pakistan's Punjab province who were sadly the victim of an attack when a van rammed a group of 300 Christians walking in procession for Easter Vigil service. And the priest explained how this van clearly could not have failed to have seen this large number of people processing, and indeed, to use his word, the priest's words, rammed this particular group of people, hence how so many were injured. And then turning to the Democratic Republic of Congo, 60 Christians killed when an Islamist rebel group in the territory of Mombasa claimed responsibility ISIS claimed responsibility for this attack in which these 60 Christians were killed on the evening of Good Friday. In the meantime, in Nigeria, a country which I visited last year, there came reports of Palm Sunday attacks in which 53 people were killed in the north-central district of that country. And that's just what the Christians have been suffering, or some of them have been suffering. When Aid to the Church Need launched its Religious Freedom Report, of which you've got copies available in the pews, we were able, as Baroness Scotland has only too rightly pointed out, and it's good to reassert these points, that 2/3 of the world's population live in countries marked by persecution and other forms of violence of basic human rights. And we desperately need, I think, and this has come through in so many of the talks we've heard today, we desperately need to come to a common understanding of what religious freedom means. How do we respect religious differences whilst being free to believe or not believe according to our own conscience? We need to find a language that articulates religious freedom, placing it, as has been so clearly demonstrated already, at the centre of human rights as a cornerstone. Where would we go in search of a text around which the world's nations can gather on this critical but vexed issue of our age? And of course, what we've heard already gives us the answer. It is, of course, the Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We've heard the words of it before, but it's so important, I think it's worth us re-emphasising what Article 18 has to say. Professor Grimm put it very clearly in explaining its importance, and he took the trouble to speak, to articulate the critical verse of Article 18, which says, "Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others and in public or private to manifest his or her religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance." And the point to say here is that Article 18 has stood the test of time. Ratified by the United Nations, it's recognised by more than 130 countries around the world. That's more than 2/3 of nations on earth. This includes nations where religious freedom is a significant challenge, such as Nigeria. And those countries that don't specifically endorse Article 18 extol religious freedom with more than just a passing nod to the various elements of Article 18. And yet, as Lord Alton of Liverpool has very clearly said, as an exponent of Article 18, he said that this particular article is observed in the breach. That's very much his phrase. Ignored, repeated very often, but so often just turned a blind eye to. And that's why Aid to the Church in Need is calling on every nation on earth, in combination with multinational agencies and organisations, including the United Nations and the European Union, to enforce Article 18 in full. And so that's why we're just going to invite you today. I know that the cards have been already done a bit of circulating, but if you do get out your mobile phones, if you haven't already, and you can then scan the QR code, which will take you directly to the petition page on our website. And it then enables you to commit yourself alongside more than 10,500 who've already done so in signing up to this vital petition that sends out a very clear message about the importance of Article 18 as a means to navigate through a way to uphold religious freedom. And just to flesh out some of the words of Pope Leo, we showed our campaign to him, We told him about the Religious Freedom Report in a private audience at Aid to the Church in Need, and he gave his reflection on what religious freedom means for him. And he said, and I think it's so important as he's traveling around, no doubt these same thoughts are percolating in his mind. He said, the right to religious freedom is not optional. It is a cornerstone of every just society as it safeguards the moral space in which conscience can be formed and exercised. He also said that religious freedom is, quote, not merely a legal right or a privilege granted by governments, but a fundamental condition for authentic reconciliation. And as we well know, boy, does our world need reconciliation right now. He went further, saying that when religious liberty is denied, quote, the human person is denied the capacity to respond freely to the call of truth. What follows, the Pope said, is what he described as a slow disintegration of the ethical and spiritual bonds that sustain communities. Trust gives way to fear, suspicion replaces dialogue, and oppression breeds violence. Powerful words from our Holy Father, and definitely well worth taking on board. So Article 18 is so much more than just freedom of worship, the right to go to church in our case. It's fundamental to what it means to be free. It's fundamental to what it means to be able to act on your conscience, to be able to think and act according to that. Before I close, because I know time is against us, I just wanted to reflect on one individual who I met while I was in Iraq back in February. Whilst I was in Iraq, I travelled with Elliot to Duhok in the north of the country, and we both heard compelling and profoundly disturbing testimony from survivors of extremism. One of them, called Sufyan, described how as a boy of 16, he and fellow Yazidis in his community were rounded up and shot. And he said he only himself survived because of the number of people who fell on top of him. He said more than 70 Yazidis died that day. And still wearing his blood-stained t-shirt, he fled up the sacred Sinjar mountain that's so important to the Yazidi community. And he said, we lost everything, and all because of the faith we profess. So it's for people like Sufyan that Article 18 exists. As I mentioned, our petition at Aid to the Church in Need for the full enforcement of Article 18 has already topped well over 10,500 signatures. But it is just a start. We do want to hit a much higher target because, as Baroness Scotland so powerfully explained, when we feel helpless, when we feel, well, what difference can I make? Initiatives like this show the power of, to use another of her phrases, collective action. It shows us what we can do together to raise our voices. And it's so important, particularly in the context of ACN's Red Wednesday campaign, to be not only a voice, but a light shining in the darkness, so that people are indeed able to say clearly that they do dare to believe. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much to John Pontifex for giving us something of a challenge to what we actually can do. Our final presentation is an audio message from Bishop Philip Mounstephen of Winchester.
Dear friends, I'm very sorry that I can't be with you for this really important event, but I'm really glad that it is taking place, and I send you my best wishes and my prayers and pray God's blessing on your time together today as you reflect on the vital importance of Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was massively important when it was framed. Seems to me it's even more important in our world today that we stand up for all that it says and for the the rights and indeed the responsibilities that are enshrined within it. It was my privilege several years ago now to author the Truro Review on the UK government's response or failure to respond to the phenomenon of Christian persecution. And it was a privilege to do that. And I'm delighted that with the favour that it found, delighted too that we argued that the best way to guarantee the freedom of Christians to express their faith in whatever way they wanted was to guarantee the right of every person to express their faith, or indeed their non-adherence to faith in the way that the way that they chose. And I'm delighted too that seems to have become part of a global movement of increasing sensitivity to this issue, of increasing advocacy for this issue. I'm delighted with the work that Aid to the Church in Need has done for the currency that Red Wednesday has achieved in our national calendar, alongside the huge amount of support that there is annually for the publication of Open Doors World Watch List, to cite just two examples. But whilst it's true that there has been growing recognition of the importance of this issue, growing public concern around it, growing recognition of it in political discourse and dialogue, it is of course true that in the intervening years since my report was published, the global situation regarding FORB has become ever more serious. The causes of that are well known. In some parts of the world, it's because of weak government, but in many parts of the world, it's because of the exact opposite of that. It's because of the development of overbearing, authoritarian, nationalistic, sometimes fundamentalistic regimes and governments that brook no opposition. And these governments, these regimes, indeed, are often bolstered not only by an ideology, but a particular theology. And I think as Christians, we need to be very aware of that and learn how to counter that in our own discourse and debates. I've taken to saying in recent years that the existence of such regimes bolstered by such ideologies and theologies is very bad news for minorities of every sort the world over. And I believe that's to be the case. But actually, I was speaking about this recently, and someone said to me, you know, it's not just bad news for minorities in those countries, it's also bad news for the majorities in those countries as well. And I think that was a very helpful and a very significant corrective. And for instance, you look at the situation at the moment in Iran, it's clearly not minorities that are suffering, it's the majority in that country. So I think we have to continue to be very aware of what's going on in the world around us, very sensitized to it, and continue to be mobilized activists who advocate for change. And I also have to say that whilst I think there has been a growing international momentum recognizing the importance of this issue, I do think that momentum has rather tailed off in recent years. I don't think, for instance, to be candid, that the American administration, the current American administration, has been as robust in its defense of this right as it could be, as it should be. Indeed, I know for a fact that some of the cuts to USAID have sorely hampered and impaired the work of advocating for the rights that are enshrined in Article 18. So I want to say, friends, keep up this struggle, keep up this fight, keep up the momentum. I do think there is an absolutely vital and key role for Christians to play in this, and there's so much in our faith that should drive us on in seeking to uphold this right and see it advanced the world over. I think we need to reflect, for instance, that there's barely a page of our scriptures, perhaps with the exception of the wisdom literature, but apart from that, there's barely a page of our scriptures that is not written against a background of domination, oppression, and persecution. So we should be, as a people, really sensitized to this issue. The Beatitudes, much beloved as Christians in the West. Anglicans very used to singing John Keeble's hymn, "Blessed are the pure in heart," and we love "Blessed are the peacemakers," and so on and so forth. But perhaps we forget that the note on which the Beatitudes end is the note of persecution, and there are not one beatitude. There's not just one beatitude on the subject of persecution. There are two. So you could almost argue that that's the culmination of the Beatitudes, a reminder of the reality of persecution, which is not something we should ever seek out, but we should always seek to defend and support those who face it, recognizing that there is a blessedness in that, but certainly something we would never want to see visited on anyone else. And then, of course, fundamentally, the parable of the Good Samaritan teaches us that our neighbors are not just those who are near us and like us, but those who are different from us and distant to us. And we must stand with them. We must stand for them. We must do all we can to protect them. And like the Good Samaritan who picked up the man from the roadside, bloodied and bruised as he was, we need to be those who continue to care for those who suffer greatly for their faith, whatever it may be, including the right not to hold a faith. We must be those who take them to the inn and succor them and help them and support them and help them back onto their feet. So bless you today in that work. As I say, I'm sorry I can't be with you, but I hope you have a really good, stimulating and enriching time together. God bless you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much to Bishop Mounstephen, whose support is really, really important for this cause. We've now come to the end of the Radio Maria broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. You can view this event again on the Farm Street online channel. Have a good rest of Sunday. Now, we now come to the Q&A. We have a few questions. We have time against us a little because we want to end in, I think, about 10 minutes. We'll see how we go. I'm going to take the first question, really there are two questions together. I'm going to take them. ACN helps a lot, but what is needed so that oppressive systems and governments will be removed? What are the United Nations mistakes here or inactions? And then, if we don't have the courage to call out Muslim countries and Hindu countries for failing to control their religious extremists, can we at least pressure the media to report the persecution of Christians? End the silence. Otherwise, what is the point of this conference? I wonder if, first of all, I could ask John Pontifex to see if he has a response to that.
Yes, what is the point of this conference in light of the challenges that are faced in the countries that are referred to? I've been traveling with aid to the Church in Need in different countries around the world. So in the 23 years that I've been with ACN, I've traveled to a number of the countries which have a strongly religious leadership, shall we say. But what I think is important here is that many of these countries are countries that extol the value, the importance of religious freedom. And if this is the case, then we as a community can call them to account. If it is the case, and many of them are in urgent need of international funding, and that funding is often predicated on upholding of human rights, including religious freedom. So if we just connect those two ideas together, the constitutions and other statutory documents, and conditionality of aid, we can see that there is some leverage here. And this is why it's important to form a broad consensus, knowing that religious freedom cannot just be a right for the few, it has to be a right not even for the many, but for all who uphold freedom and who uphold conscience and freedom of thought. So there is so much that we can do in the face of these challenges, and that's why we're so committed to this.
I think one of the levers that's really not used so much is the business angle. And to the vice president of my foundation, the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation, was a senior counsel for Occidental Petroleum in the Gulf. And he was a Latter-day Saint, and they were having a really hard time getting the government to approve their church to have a meeting place. And for years, he just thought, if my boss, would say to the government, look, our folks just need a place where they can worship, because it's hard for us to keep them here if they're going to have to do it in secret or feel like they're breaking the law. So I think there's a whole, literacy problem around religious freedom that. Of why, that's just one example of an argument that could be made for people. But I think that we need to develop these tools so that more people have the, join this cause and can make a case to those powers that prevent this. I think that, I see more, training materials, more targeted materials. And then the last comment I'll make is, of course, in the UK military, you have chaplains who are from different faiths. And I remember meeting the first Muslim chaplain some years ago. And so I think even telling stories here in a Christian heritage country, where the king is the head of the church, to show that these stories where there's acceptance of others in systems. So I think that's another kind of storytelling, to help people who can't see that this is a good thing for their community or environment, but to show that.
I think one of the things we can do, and certainly one of the things that the Commonwealth does, is to create practical implementation frameworks, because you need legal guardrails. It's not just enough to say we have the laws, you have to implement the laws in a way that people can touch, taste, and feel. And so the creation of framework legislation across the Commonwealth has been really useful, because it's not just tell me, it's show me. How do I do this? We trained lawyers, we trained judges, we trained police officers, we trained the permanent secretaries, not just to talk about it, but to help them to know how to do it. And it was particularly important to use good practice in countries which were primarily of the faiths which are challenged, and say, we're not framing this in our tradition, we're framing it in yours. And it's really, really important. The other thing I'd say, it's extremely important to get our young people involved. And 60% of the Commonwealth is under the age of 30. And just to think about the things we were doing in Pakistan, the opportunity to bring young Pakistanis together of all faiths, including the Ahmadi community, and to listen to them. And I remember having a conversation when we had a youth council meeting, and the young Pakistanis and the young Indians who were together told me, don't worry about this, Secretary General. We know the oldies don't understand it, but we do. And that they were going to change things. So I think really invest in young people because they are our future and they see things very differently to the way in which those of us who are somewhat more burdened with age see it.
Now, we have a couple of questions on particular parts of the world. So this is really to offer to whoever on the panel might like to answer these. The first one is regarding Saudi Arabia. I'm the founder and former president of a Tamil Catholic underground fellowship in Riyadh. Still, there are no religious rights. Have you even taken any steps to religious rights in Saudi Arabia? Former King Abdullah visited Pope John Paul II. The Saudi newspapers published that there will be a Catholic church. There would have been a Catholic church built in Riyadh, but this never happened. So, question about Saudi Arabia. And the other part of the world is Israel and Palestine. We have a question. Could you give us some comments on the plight of Christians and Muslims in the Holy Land, Israel and Palestine? We may even want to add Lebanon to that, I don't know. Would anybody like to answer either of those two, please? John?
Just looking at Saudi Arabia, Professor Brian Grimm spoke about Saudi in his remarks, but it's been a country that's been very much on the radar for us at Aid to the Church in Need, and I've been involved in our Persecution and Forgotten report that assesses persecution in different countries around the world, and Saudi Arabia has frequently appeared in it, if not invariably. And it's important to note that though there have been changes for the better, we are still very much concerned. And it's worth noting that a large number of the Christians who are in Saudi Arabia have the double challenge of not only being Christian, but also of being workers, migrant workers. And so their rights are further challenged, undermined by the way in which they're working in very menial tasks. And I think this brings us back to what Professor Brian Grimm has been indicating, that the need is there to open up the recognition of the economy, of business, as being a means by which to not only enable trade, but also recognizing religious freedom as in many ways a precondition for that where there is greater religious freedom, there you will find greater prosperity. And the various communities in Saudi, we know, are urgently in need of support because of their straitened circumstances, particularly those who are religious minorities. And we know from our work at Aid to the Church in Need that many of these communities operate under a background of great challenge and great difficulty, and certainly are not able to worship as freely as all of us would wish them to. So this is a really great challenge for all of us to contend with.
Can I just say that there are the Pope and the Grand Imam have been working through the Zayed Award Committee to bring both Catholics, or Christians, and Muslims particularly together, but those of all faiths. And I think using these efforts that His Holiness has continued, Pope Francis started it, but Pope Leo has continued, is really important. So we need to think about all the ways that we can bring in, I don't mean to pressurize, but I do mean to encourage people to look again and to understand better the impact. And I say that because I was part of the Zayed Award Committee.
I'll say one thing on Israel and Palestine. part of, we're looking for solutions, and so solutions are often found in people doing things that are successful. And so one of the things that I've been working on is to give awards to business leaders and others who are creating these kind of solutions. And in Israel, a business owner, Judith Richter, has a company that makes heart stents. And both of her parents were Holocaust survivors and very dramatic stories. But she feels so committed to building peace between all of the communities as a Jewish woman, but bringing peace to all of them. So every year she has a School of the Heart where she brings people from Jordan, Egypt, of course, Palestinian territories, Israel, and all the different faiths to her company, and does a summer school. These are for kids about to go into university, and teaches them, it's called the School of the Heart, to teach them about cardiac, the cardiac field. But she mixes them all up so that you have a mixed team of different faiths and nationalities, and then they have a competition to solve different problems, and then the red team or the blue team or the green team wins. And she now has nearly 1,000 graduates, maybe every summer there's 30, 40 kids. And all of them are now advocates for peace. So, but you've probably never heard of that, right? I would be surprised if you had. But I think that's one of the things that's often missing is the solution side, and magnifying those voices. And this year, I just was communicating with her recently, and she said this year, this past summer, was and this was in the context of the Gaza, she said that was the largest school they had ever had, and they had more Palestinian and Muslim kids wanting to participate than ever. So right in the midst of all of the horror that was happening, such good things are happening. So I think we in looking, we need to find those solutions, amplify them, get others to think of how they might do something similar to that as well.
We did have another question really on balancing, defending Christian tradition and the need to help Christians who are persecuted with interreligious dialogue. But I think we've begun to answer that through some of the discussion already on the panel. One final question then. I'll just read it out. Could you say something about Christianity in the USA being hijacked by Trump and Vance to promote wars, unjust wars? Trump isn't truly Christian, is he? I think you might be in pole position, Professor Grimm. Apologies.
Well, the world follows this, you can, the question sort of answers itself. But it's a very complicated situation in the United States in that we have a very large evangelical bloc, but they're not singular in their perspective. But for many years, the left had, just to give a little background, the left had pushed so far to the left, especially on an issue like gay marriage, that was legalized before there was consensus in the country that people accepted that. And so that was part of some of the backlash. And then Christian narratives, then started developing a narrative that everything, as Donald Trump says, you can't be a Democrat and be a Christian, as if he can say that, but he says that. And so that was the narrative that brought religion into a political movement that was centered around Donald Trump. And he was the rescuer of the persecuted Christians who had all these liberal policies pushed on them. And so that, he's been able to take a grievance and then rally people around that. So it's, the Christians, I know his spiritual advisor, and I know the things that she says to him, and it's almost, like, as you may have heard, that at Easter, she said, we had a Savior who was persecuted, who was tried, who was convicted unrighteously, and, was crucified, and we have a president who was exactly like that. And then you see the meme of him being Jesus. Well, people have been telling him that from that side. So it's a really interesting time for, it's a challenging time for religious freedom, because those same people are saying, like our Secretary of War or Secretary of Defense, now can get up and, quote Bible or pseudo Bible verses, but, use language and calling, this a holy war. So things like that really are not in the description of things that lead to religious freedom. So all of these things are a danger. And in the measures that we had at the Pew Research Center that I developed around the world, one of the questions was whether or not political leaders, this is an indication of a lack of religious freedom, political leaders use religious rhetoric and target people related to religion. And so even the targeting of Pope Leo and saying, I don't care for him, there will be people who interpret that now Pope Leo is a valid target for, violence. So these kind of things that leaders say are so important, because once they start saying things that are crossing that line, so many people, it just normalizes it, that it's okay now to view that Pope. We don't like him. He's soft on crime, whatever that means, things that he says about the Pope. I don't know if that answers the question, but, there, and even, I'll just say this last, in the Catholic Church in America, I've been very interested. My wife worked for the U.S. Navy, and our home parish was the U.S. Naval Academy, the Catholic community at the U.S. Navy. And our bishop is Bishop Brolio, who was the president of the Catholic Bishops' Conference last year. And he's the Archbishop for Military Diocese. And he was interviewed and said, there's no definition by which this war can be called a just war. And so you have these voices, and then we also have other cardinals like Cardinal Dolan, you may know, and another one that you may not, Bishop Robert Barron, who's gotten close to the administration, who are still supporting this. So, I guess the very first word that you say about religious freedom, about what we can do is to pray. Pray for the strength of those who are actually expressing truth.
Can I just say, it probably demonstrates to us why we need to be very careful about any form of extremism in any of our religions. Because if you look at the extremes of all our faiths, they're very similar. They're intolerant. They believe that there is only they who have the right to have a view, and they are oppressive. And if you look at the center of all of our religions, they too are similar. They promote love, temperance, understanding, peace. So I think perhaps one of the most important things that it's happening now is we are being shown viscerally what the worst forms of faith can look like, and puts a huge emphasis that we need to represent what truth and real faith looks like, because otherwise people won't have hope. They'll think that this nationalistic Christianity is Christianity, and I, for one, do not think that's true.
Thank you very much both, and perhaps that is a good place to draw this afternoon to a close. I would, before we go hopefully to refreshments, to say a final thanks to all those who've been involved, especially to our wonderful speakers, our panel, those also who gave audio messages, to all of you participants, to those who are also online, to the ACN staff and volunteers, to those involved in the broadcast, Jen Copestake producing it along with Tom Huang, to Michael Good here in front of house and behind the scenes. Thank you so much to everybody for enabling today to happen. And thankfully it is also recorded, and so you can view it back. Just to make a final plea, please to sign the petition, and I know that ACN will be able to help with that also at the refreshments. We do have refreshments now in the Arupe Hall. Please do just follow everyone else if you don't know exactly where you're going. I'm sure the ACN staff will be able to direct you, provided by the Cana Cafe Lounge, which exists to help those get back into work and be trained in hospitality. So light refreshments in the Arupe Hall, an opportunity to meet everyone. I think there's a final thing, which is, Karen, which is gifts. Is that right?
Yes. I don't know if Jen can come down. Maybe not. She's probably still. We'll do it in the hall. Yes, we'll finish off in the hall. Thank you. Yeah, that's all. Well, thank you everybody for coming. And the Arupe Hall is to my left through those doors. If you just follow everyone. And thank you, Father Dominic. Yes.
Let's end with the Our Father. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Thank you very much, everyone.